The sound of markers scraping against construction paper filled the kitchen, accompanied by the faint hum of the dishwasher and the occasional sigh from Theo as he concentrated. His small hands, smudged with glue and a bit of glitter from an earlier mishap, carefully positioned a paper cut out of a rocket onto his poster board. Jillian stood at the stove, stirring a pot of soup while keeping a close eye on him, offering the occasional word of encouragement. "Does this look right?" Theo asked, tilting the board toward her. His dark curls bounced as he adjusted his grip, his eyes scanning her face for approval. She turned, wiping her hands on a dish towel before leaning in for a closer look. "Looks great," she said, ruffling his hair. "The rocket is perfectly placed." Theo beamed before his expression turned thoughtful. "Miss Carver said we should add pictures of our family. Like moms and dads." He reached for a pair of scissors, his voice casual. "Can I have a picture of Dad?" Jillian's hand froze mid-wipe. The words landed like an unexpected gust of wind, knocking her slightly off balance. She straightened, trying to keep her face neutral. "A picture of Dad," she repeated, stalling for time. Theo nodded, still focused on trimming the edges of his poster. "Yeah. I mean, we have tons of pictures of you. But I don't think I've ever seen one of him." Her mind scrambled for a response, but nothing felt quite right. She had always planned to tell Theo more when he was older, when he would understand that some things were too painful to explain all at once. "Of course," she said, forcing a smile. "I'll find one for you." Satisfied, Theo went back to his project, humming under his breath as he carefully glued a tiny paper astronaut next to the rocket. Jillian turned back to the stove, stirring the soup with more force than necessary. She reminded herself that this was normal. Kids ask questions. They want to know where they come from. It was just a picture. But as she later stood in front of her closet, reaching for the shoebox where she kept old photos, a strange unease settled in her chest. She pulled the box down from the top shelf and carried it to the bed, her fingers tracing its worn edges before lifting the lid. Inside, there were photos of Theo as a baby, of her own parents, of vacations long past. But as she sifted through them, one realization became increasingly clear: there were no photos of Caleb. Frowning, she flipped through the stack again. Then again. Old birthday parties. A Christmas morning. A blurry shot of Theo at the park, taken when he was barely 2. But nothing of Caleb. That didn't make sense. She knew she had kept some. A picture of their wedding day. A candid shot of Caleb reading on the couch, legs stretched out, glasses slipping down his nose. There had been a framed one on her dresser for years, she was sure of it. She went to the hallway, where a dusty photo album sat tucked between cookbooks on a shelf. She pulled it down, flipping through its pages. Baby showers, Theo's first steps, summer afternoons at the lake. But still, no Caleb. The pages where she thought those pictures should be felt strangely empty. Her chest tightened as a strange, creeping unease slid up her spine. She sat on the edge of the bed, gripping the album as her heart pounded. She had memories, vivid ones. The way he used to laugh, head tilted back, a deep, warm sound. The way he made coffee in the mornings, humming absent-mindedly. She remembered the way he held Theo in the hospital, whispering something she couldn't hear, his face alight with awe. But if those moments had happened, if he had been real, then where were the photos? The records office smelled like paper and old ink, the kind of place where time seemed to move slower, as if weighed down by the sheer amount of bureaucracy. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, casting a cool glow over the rows of filing cabinets and the handful of people waiting in line. Jillian shifted her purse higher on her shoulder as she approached the counter, gripping the paperwork she had filled out earlier. Marion, the clerk on duty, was a woman in her 60s with silver hair pinned into a tight bun. She wore a navy cardigan over a floral blouse, and a pair of reading glasses dangled from a chain around her neck. She looked up with a polite but tired smile, as if she had spent the last 40 years answering the same 3 questions over and over. "Good morning, dear. What can I do for you?" Jillian slid the form across the counter, forcing a pleasant expression. "I need a copy of my husband's death certificate for my son's school records." Marian took the paper, adjusted her glasses, and skimmed over the details. "Caleb Alden, you said?" "Yes," Jillian confirmed, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "He passed away 8 years ago." Marian nodded and turned toward her computer, fingers tapping methodically against the keyboard. The screen reflected faintly in her glasses as she scrolled through records, her expression neutral. Jillian exhaled slowly, telling herself this was just a formality. She had expected to fill out a request, wait a few business days, and leave with an official copy. But then Marian frowned. Jillian's fingers curled slightly against the counter. "Is something wrong?" Marian didn't answer right away. She leaned closer to the screen, adjusted her glasses again, and typed something else. The clack of the keyboard filled the silence between them. "I'm not seeing anything," Marian said finally. "Let me check another database." Jillian let out a small, nervous laugh. "That's strange. Maybe it's under a different department?" Marian didn't respond, already deep in another search. The minutes stretched longer, the hum of the lights suddenly more noticeable. Finally, Marian shook her head and turned back to Jillian. "There's no record of a Caleb Alden in our system. No death certificate, no birth record, no marriage license." Jillian blinked. She felt her heart give a strange, uneven beat, as if her body hadn't quite processed the words. "That's not possible." Marian's expression softened, but her tone remained professional. "If he passed away in this county, there should be a record." "Are you sure of the name and date?" "Of course I'm sure." Jillian's voice wavered slightly. She reached into her purse, fumbling through the contents. "I have old bills with his name on them. A bank statement. There has to be something." Marian hesitated. "I can try one more search with just his first name and the year of death. But if there's no record, you might need to check with the hospital or legal offices." Jillian nodded quickly. "Yes, please. Try again." Marian turned back to the screen, her fingers moving slower this time. Jillian's nails dug into her palm as she watched the woman's eyes flicker back and forth. After another moment, Marian sighed and sat back. "I'm sorry, dear. There's nothing. It's like," she hesitated. "It's like he was never here." The room suddenly felt too bright, too sharp. Jillian forced a tight smile, pushing down the sudden, rising unease in her chest. "I'll check with the hospital. Maybe it's just a clerical error." Marian nodded sympathetically, but Jillian barely registered it. Her hands were already gripping the paperwork as she turned, moving through the office in a daze. She told herself there was a logical explanation. There had to be. The hospital lobby was colder than she remembered. The air smelled of antiseptic and coffee, the kind that had been sitting in the pot too long. Jillian wrapped her arms around herself as she approached the reception desk, where a woman in blue scrubs glanced up with polite indifference. "I need to request medical records for my husband," Jillian said, steadying her voice. "He passed away here 8 years ago." The receptionist slid a form toward her. "Fill this out, and I'll have someone check the archives." Jillian scrawled Caleb's information quickly, her fingers tightening around the pen. The woman took the form and disappeared into the back. The waiting area was quiet except for the beeping of a distant heart monitor. A man across the room flipped idly through a magazine. Jillian stared at the tiled floor, her pulse drumming in her ears. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. She shifted impatiently just as the receptionist returned, now accompanied by an older man in a lab coat. His name badge read Dr. Hale. Ms. Alden? He looked at her with a cautious expression. Yes, Jillian said quickly, standing. He hesitated, glancing at the paper in his hand. I'm sorry, but we don't have any record of a Caleb Alden being admitted or passing away at this hospital. Jillian's stomach dropped. She shook her head. That's not possible. Dr. Hale sighed. I had our records department do a thorough check. If he was treated here, if he passed away in our facility, we would have documentation. But we found nothing under that name. Jillian's mouth opened, but no words came out. I can refer you to the county's vital statistics office, he offered. But if they don't have a record, and we don't have a record, it may be worth verifying the details. Jillian's hands clenched at her sides. I know my husband was real, she said, her voice too loud in the sterile space. I was here. I signed paperwork. She stopped. She tried to picture that moment, the day Caleb died. The way the doctor had walked in with somber eyes, how the machines had beeped in rhythm with her shallow breaths, how she had gripped his cold hand until a nurse gently pried her fingers away. But the image flickered. The details suddenly felt loose, like a dream slipping from memory upon waking. Dr. Hale studied her with careful patience. Memories can be tricky things, Ms. Alden. If there's anything else I can do to help. Jillian took a shaky step back. No. Thank you. She turned before he could say anything else. As she pushed through the exit doors and stepped into the crisp afternoon air, her breath came fast and uneven. The city moved around her, cars honking, people rushing past, but she felt separate from all of it, as if standing behind glass. This wasn't just a clerical error. This wasn't a misplaced document. Something was wrong. And for the first time in her life, Jillian wasn't sure if what she remembered was real at all. Justine's apartment smelled like cinnamon and vanilla, a scent that had nothing to do with baking and everything to do with her obsession with scented candles. She had at least 4 burning on the coffee table, their tiny flames flickering against the walls as she poured 2 glasses of wine. Jillian sat curled on the couch, knees tucked to her chest, gripping a throw pillow like it might hold her together. So let me get this straight, Justine said, settling into the armchair across from her. You went to get Caleb's death certificate, and they told you he doesn't exist? Jillian nodded, jaw tight. And then you went to the hospital where he died, and they also have no record of him? Another nod. Justine took a slow sip of her wine. Bree, I love you, but, are you sure you're remembering his name right? Jillian exhaled sharply, her grip tightening on the pillow. Of course I'm sure. I'm just saying. Maybe it was a mix-up. Maybe he went by a middle name or something? There's no mix-up, Justine, Jillian snapped, then immediately winced. Sorry. I don't understand what's happening. Justine leaned forward, her expression softening. Hey, I get it. This is weird. But there's gotta be an explanation. Jillian nodded, but the unease in her stomach didn't settle. She wanted to believe that. She wanted to believe there was a logical reason why she couldn't find Caleb's records, that this was just a bureaucratic mess she'd untangle in a few days. But something in her gut told her it was more than that. Justine set down her glass and reached for her laptop. Let's check online. Maybe some records are just misfiled. Jillian watched as Justine typed Caleb Alden into a public records search. The page loaded, spinning for what felt like an eternity. Then, nothing. No results. Okay, Justine said, clicking on a different database. Maybe something else will. Nothing. She tried again. And again. Each time, the same result. Jillian's throat felt tight. Try our marriage license. Justine typed quickly, hitting enter with a little too much force. Her brow furrowed. There's nothing. A cold weight settled in Jillian's chest. Justine sat back, blowing out a slow breath. All right. That's weird. Jillian swallowed hard, forcing her voice to stay steady. You were at my wedding, right? Justine hesitated, just for a second. Jillian felt her stomach drop. Of course I was, Justine said quickly. I mean, I must have been. Jillian's pulse thudded in her ears. You don't remember, do you? Justine opened her mouth, then closed it. I remember you being with Caleb. I remember you having Theo. But, the wedding. She trailed off, looking genuinely distressed. Jillian's hands were ice cold. This is ridiculous, she said, standing abruptly. I have proof. I have bank statements, insurance paperwork. Justine watched as Jillian grabbed her bag, yanking it open and pulling out her phone. I'll find something right now. She opened her banking app, scrolling through old records. Her fingers froze. Her relationship status. Single. Her mortgage. Sole owner. Her tax documents. Her name. And only her name. Jillian stared at the screen, her breathing shallow. Justine stood slowly, moving next to her. What does it say? Jillian handed over the phone, unable to speak. Justine's brows knitted together as she scrolled. Maybe you refinanced? Jillian shook her head. No. She pulled out her email, searching for old insurance documents. She clicked the most recent one, scanning down to the beneficiaries section. Her heart pounded. Theo was listed. Caleb was not. Her entire body felt unsteady, like she had been standing on solid ground a moment ago and suddenly found herself on a fault line. Justine exhaled, setting the phone down. Bree. I need to go home, Jillian whispered. Justine reached for her arm. Wait. Maybe we should keep looking. Maybe. I need to go home, Jillian repeated, grabbing her bag. Justine didn't argue this time. The house felt different when Jillian walked through the door, like she had stepped into a place she no longer recognized. She moved through the rooms, her breathing uneven, checking places she had never thought to check before. Drawers. Filing cabinets. Old keepsake boxes. She found Theo's birth certificate. Father's name, unknown. Her hands shook. She went to the closet, dragging out old storage bins. She pulled out clothes, letters, receipts, anything that should have Caleb's name. Nothing. Not a single legal document tied him to her life. She sat on the floor, surrounded by scattered papers, her chest tight. She had always been so sure. She had always known Caleb had existed. But if he had, then why was there no proof? The clock on the nightstand glowed dimly, but Jillian had stopped checking it hours ago. The weight of exhaustion pressed against her, but every time she closed her eyes, the same questions flooded in, unrelenting. Had she imagined it? Had she dreamed up an entire marriage? Had Caleb ever been real at all? The old photo album smelled faintly of dust and ink, the scent of memories pressed between glossy pages. Jillian sat cross-legged on the bedroom floor, the album propped open on her lap, fingers moving methodically through each page. There were pictures of birthdays, vacations, baby showers, every milestone of her life carefully preserved. But as she flipped through, her stomach clenched. There were no wedding photos. She turned the pages faster, her pulse keeping pace, expecting any second to land on an image of herself in a white dress, Caleb at her side, a bouquet in her hands. She remembered the way the fabric had felt against her skin, the weight of the veil, the sound of clinking glasses at the reception. It wasn't just a vague impression, these were memories. She knew they had existed. They had to. But the album ended with pictures of her pregnant with Theo, her belly round beneath a summer dress, her hands resting protectively over him. There was no wedding. No Caleb. Jillian slammed the album shut, her breath coming faster than it should have. She pushed to her feet and yanked open the closet, pulling down storage bins and shuffling through old envelopes stuffed with photographs. She searched through drawers, through keepsake boxes, through every possible place where a picture of her wedding day could be tucked away. Nothing. It wasn't just that she couldn't find them, it was as if they had never existed at all. Her fingers curled around the edge of the dresser for support as she stared at the mess of papers and photo albums spread out before her. She had expected missing documents, but not this. Not missing proof of a day she could still see so clearly in her mind. The weight of it pressed against her chest, heavy and suffocating. She reached for her phone, scrolling through contacts until she found the number of the wedding venue. Her fingers hesitated over the screen before she pressed the call button. The line rang twice before a voice answered. "Thank you for calling Maplewood Gardens, this is Erin. How can I assist you?" Jillian swallowed, trying to keep her voice steady. "Hi, I got married at your venue about 8 years ago, and I was wondering if you still have any records of the event?" There was a brief pause. "Of course. What was the name on the reservation?" "Caleb Alden and Jillian Alden." It would have been under either of those names. She heard clicking on the other end of the line, followed by the sound of Erin humming lightly as she searched. Jillian clenched her jaw, pressing the phone tighter to her ear. "Okay," Erin said after a moment, "I'm not seeing anything under those names. Do you know the exact date? Maybe it was booked under someone else's name?" Jillian's grip on the phone tightened. "No, it would have been under one of ours." "Could you check again?" More typing. Another pause. "I'm sorry," Erin said, sounding genuinely apologetic. "There's no record of a wedding by that name." "Are you sure it was held here?" Jillian blinked rapidly, her breath catching. "Yes, I'm sure. I walked down the aisle in your garden." The reception was in the ballroom with the big chandeliers. A beat of silence. "We do have a ballroom with chandeliers," Erin admitted, "but I don't have any record of your event. I can double-check with our archives, but..." Jillian shook her head, even though Erin couldn't see her. "There has to be something. Photos, a payment history, an email confirmation. I can check old invoices, but if it's not in the system, I'm afraid I won't be able to pull anything up." Jillian's heartbeat thudded unevenly in her chest. She tried to remember the exact details of booking the venue. Had she called? Had she emailed? She had walked through that space before the wedding, had spoken with a coordinator, had planned table arrangements and floral displays. Hadn't she? She pressed a hand to her forehead. Erin's voice was softer now. "Would you like me to call you back if I find anything?" Jillian opened her mouth, then closed it. Her throat felt tight, her pulse unsteady. "No," she said finally, barely above a whisper. "Thank you." She ended the call and let the phone slip from her fingers onto the bed. The room felt wrong. Like she had stepped into a version of her life where the pieces didn't fit the way they were supposed to. She sank onto the edge of the mattress, gripping the fabric of her jeans, trying to focus on her breathing. An entire wedding didn't just disappear. Justine had the kind of voice that could make even terrible news sound reasonable, like a radio host for a station dedicated to calming people down. That was probably why Jillian had called her. Not because she wanted to hear what Justine had to say, but because she needed someone to tell her she wasn't unraveling. Justine, unfortunately, did not seem prepared to do that. "Bree, I love you, and I say this with all the care in the world," she began, stretching her words like she was speaking to someone holding a fragile glass vase. But have you considered talking to someone? Like, professionally? Jillian exhaled sharply and tossed a throw pillow across the couch. I don't need a therapist. I need answers. Justine didn't flinch, which was a sign of both her patience and her experience with Jillian's dramatics. I believe that you believe this, she said carefully. But if the wedding venue has no record, and the hospital has no record, and the government has no record, then I didn't hallucinate a marriage, Jillian snapped. Justine folded her arms. Then let's find proof. Because right now, you're working yourself into a panic over something that might not. Don't say it. Justine sighed and held up her hands. Okay. What about Caleb's family? A coworker? Someone besides me who knew him. Jillian was already scrolling through her phone, fingers unsteady. Gavin. He was supposed to be Caleb's best man. Justine's eyebrows lifted. Gavin as in the Gavin who threw up in your sink that night? The very one, Jillian muttered, pressing call. It rang twice before a deep voice answered. Gavin Highmore. Jillian forced a breath into her lungs. Hey, Gavin. It's Jillian Witt, Jillian. A pause. Then, Jillian. Wow, it's been forever. How's life? She ignored the pleasantries. Hey, quick question. Do you remember Caleb? Silence. Jillian's grip on the phone tightened. Caleb Alden. Another pause. Should I? Her stomach twisted. Gavin, come on. He was my husband. You were supposed to be his best man. Gavin let out an awkward chuckle. Jillian, I don't want to sound like a jerk, but I honestly have no idea who you're talking about. Jillian blinked rapidly, shaking her head as if that might fix whatever was wrong with the world. That's not funny. I'm not joking. She pressed her fingers against her temple. What about that dinner? The one at Rinaldi's? The four of us, me, Caleb, you, and that girl you were seeing. Gavin made a thoughtful noise, like he was digging through old memories. Rinaldi's? I mean, yeah, I went there a bunch back then. But not with anyone named Caleb. Jillian's hands trembled. You don't remember sitting across from him? Talking about that ridiculous fishing trip? Gavin laughed, but it wasn't the kind she was expecting. It wasn't the awkward kind, the kind that meant, oh, I must have forgotten. It was easy, amused, the kind that meant, that never happened. Jillian, he said, still chuckling, I think you've got me mixed up with someone else. The room tilted slightly. She sat down before her knees could give out. No, she whispered, more to herself than to him. Gavin hesitated. You okay? Jillian's head felt too heavy for her shoulders. I have to go. She hung up before he could answer, phone slipping from her fingers. Justine was watching her carefully. What did he say? Jillian looked up, throat dry, stomach churning, hands still shaking. He doesn't remember him. The office smelled like old paper and burnt coffee, the kind that had been sitting on a warmer for hours past its prime. The walls were lined with metal filing cabinets, and a dusty ceiling fan turned lazily overhead. Declan Frost, the private investigator Jillian had found online in a frenzy at 2 a.m, sat behind a desk cluttered with case files, an empty takeout container, and a half-eaten protein bar. He was younger than she expected, mid-30s, sharp features, the kind of person who looked like he'd either be very good at his job or just really good at looking busy. So, let me get this straight. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, studying her like she was one of his missing persons cases. You were married to a man named Caleb Alden, but there's no official record of him anywhere. No death certificate, no marriage license, no credit history. Jillian nodded, hands clasped tightly in her lap. I know how this sounds. Declan shrugged. I've heard weirder. That was a small relief. She slid a folder across the desk. This is everything I have, what's left, anyway. Bank statements, old letters, Theo's birth certificate. Declan flipped through the papers, brows furrowing. Your kid's birth certificate says, father unknown. Jillian tensed. That's wrong. I was there when they filled it out. Caleb was in the room. Declan hummed in thought, then grabbed his laptop. All right, let's start with the basics. His fingers moved quickly over the keyboard, pulling up databases Jillian had never even heard of. She watched as he checked government records, hospital archives, tax filings. Her pulse hammered with each result. Nothing. Declan tapped his fingers against the desk. This is weird. Jillian let out a dry laugh. Welcome to my nightmare. Okay, let's get creative. He typed something new, scrolling through a list of names. There are a handful of Caleb Aldens across the country. Any chance he went by a middle name or a variation? Jillian shook her head. No. Just Caleb. Declan continued searching, muttering under his breath. Then he stopped. Huh. Jillian sat up straighter. What? There's a Caleb Alden in Colorado. He turned the screen toward her. But not your guy. She leaned in, staring at the profile. The man in the record was at least 20 years older than her Caleb, with a completely different background. Her stomach twisted. What does that mean? Declan exhaled through his nose. It means there's no Caleb Alden that matches your husband anywhere in public records. But I'll keep digging. Jillian barely heard him. Her ears were ringing, her heart beat too loud. He had to be real. He had to. Theo was lying on the living room floor, crayons scattered around him, working on a drawing of what looked like a spaceship. Jillian watched him from the doorway, hands gripping the frame to keep herself steady. Mom? Theo didn't look up, still focused on coloring in a star. When can I have that picture of Dad? Jillian's breath caught. Theo glanced up now, squinting at her. You said you'd find one. She swallowed hard. I know, sweetheart. I'm working on it. Theo tilted his head, considering this. Did he not like having his picture taken? Jillian forced a smile. Something like that. Theo accepted this answer far too easily, humming as he went back to his drawing. She turned away before he could ask anything else. Jillian sat cross-legged on the bedroom floor, surrounded by the wreckage of her own making. Drawers half open, papers scattered, boxes overturned. A mess of her own life spilled out in front of her, and yet, nothing. Not a single thing with Caleb's name on it. She had started with the obvious places, her bedside table, the old filing cabinet in the hallway. When that turned up nothing, she had moved to storage bins, the ones shoved in the back of her closet, the ones she never touched unless she was looking for Christmas destinations or old tax records. Still, nothing. She told herself to stay calm. She had to have something. A note. A card. A receipt. Even an old grocery list with his handwriting. But every time she thought she had something, an old birthday card, a bill stub, her own name was the only one on it. Her fingers tightened around the lid of a battered cardboard box. This one was older than the rest, its corners softened from years of being shoved into forgotten spaces. She lifted the top and reached inside, feeling past the loose photographs and tangled cords. Her hands brushed against fabric. She pulled it out slowly. A shirt. Caleb's old gray hoodie, the one she had stolen so often he eventually stopped asking for it back. She brought it to her chest, fingers gripping the worn fabric, inhaling deeply. The scent was faint now, just the lingering ghost of detergent and something else she couldn't quite place. She closed her eyes, her mind instantly filling with images. Caleb standing in their kitchen, sleeves pushed up as he made coffee. Caleb on the couch, one arm draped over the back, the soft hum of a baseball game on TV. And then, just as quickly, something shifted. A different memory. She was at a department store, standing in front of a display of men's clothing. This hoodie was in her hands, folded neatly. She could hear the overhead music, the hum of people shopping around her. She could feel the weight of it as she carried it to the register, reaching for her wallet. She bought this. Her breath caught, her fingers tightening around the fabric. Had Caleb ever even worn it? Declan sat across from her, fingers steepled, eyes scanning his computer screen with the kind of focus that made Jillian's stomach twist. The office felt smaller today, more suffocating, as if the walls had inched closer overnight. The air smelled of burnt coffee, stale paper, and something sharper, her own panic. "Okay," he said finally, exhaling like he had just finished reading the world's most confusing novel. "This is strange." Jillian's fingernails dug into the arms of the chair. "Strange how?" Declan leaned forward, his gaze steady. "Everything in your life checks out. Your birth certificate, school records, social security, bank accounts, everything. The hospital where you gave birth to Theo, your mortgage, your job history, it's all there." Jillian waited, her pulse drumming behind her ribs. "And Caleb?" Declan didn't answer right away. He looked back at the screen, jaw tightening slightly. It's like he never existed. A sharp, involuntary laugh escaped her. "That's not possible." Declan clicked his mouse, scrolling through something she couldn't see. "It's more than just missing paperwork. It's like he was never part of your history at all. No credit card transactions linked to him. No phone records. No car registration. Every financial decision in your household was made by you." Jillian shook her head. "That's wrong. We had a joint bank account." "No, you didn't." Her chest constricted. "Yes, we did." Declan turned the screen toward her. "Your account history for the last 10 years. Every transaction, every deposit, every withdrawal. Her name. Only her name." Her throat felt tight. "This doesn't make sense," she whispered. Declan tapped a key, bringing up another screen. "You bought your house alone. Your tax returns list you as single. Theo's school records only mention you." Jillian swallowed hard. "So you're saying I just imagined a whole person?" Declan sat back, his expression unreadable. "I'm saying that whatever happened, there's no record of him. Anywhere." Jillian let out a breath that was too shaky, too unsteady. She felt like she was standing at the edge of something steep and unforgiving. "I don't understand." Declan studied her. "Jillian, what's your earliest memory of Caleb?" She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Not because she didn't remember him, but because the memories didn't feel real. They were clear, yes. Vivid, she could see them. But now, with everything in front of her, it was like remembering a dream that had lasted years instead of hours. A slow, sickening thought crept into her mind. What if she had been grieving someone who had never lived? A sob ripped from her throat before she could stop it. Declan had taken to pacing, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, the fabric of his blazer crinkling with every step. His office, already small, felt even smaller as he moved, muttering to himself, occasionally glancing at his screen like it might suddenly decide to make sense. Jillian sat frozen in the chair, staring at the desk but seeing nothing. Her mind was too full, too loud. She had been unraveling for days, but now it felt different. Less like a slow unraveling and more like she had been yanked apart at the seams. Declan stopped suddenly, leaning toward his monitor, eyes narrowing. What? Jillian asked, her voice hoarse from crying. He didn't answer immediately, his fingers flying over the keyboard. The rhythmic clicking filled the space between them. Jillian, he said finally, his voice tight. Did you know you were admitted to the hospital 8 years ago? Jillian's stomach lurched. What? Declan turned the screen toward her. There it was. Her name. Her medical record. The date. 8 years ago. Right around the time she met Caleb. She swallowed, her mouth suddenly dry. What does it say? Declan clicked through the file, scrolling quickly. Jillian clenched her hands in her lap. What happened to me? Declan's frown deepened. That's the thing, he said, shaking his head. It doesn't say. Jillian leaned forward. What do you mean? The record confirms you were admitted, but there's no reason listed. No diagnosis. No doctor's notes. Just your name, the date, and the discharge status. Jillian stared at the screen, a strange numbness settling over her. She had been in the hospital. And she didn't remember it. Her hands shook as she reached for the keyboard. Declan stepped back, letting her take over. She scrolled through the file, searching for something, anything, that could explain why she had been there. But there was nothing. Just empty fields where details should have been. A chill spread through her, slow and deep. Something had happened to her. And someone had erased the evidence. Dr. Harvey's office was the kind of place designed to make people feel calm. The walls were painted in soft, non-threatening shades of blue, the waiting room chairs were plush enough to be comfortable but not too comfortable, and there was a fish tank bubbling quietly in the corner. It was the kind of office where you expected to be reassured, to be told everything was fine. Jillian did not feel fine. The receptionist, a woman with tortoiseshell glasses and an air of practiced politeness, had made her wait 20 minutes before finally leading her into a small, windowless exam room. A minute later, Dr. Harvey walked in. He was older than she expected, with neatly combed gray hair and a steady gaze that made her feel like he was already assessing her, taking mental notes. His white coat was crisp, his movements efficient as he sat down across from her. You're Jillian Alden? She nodded, her pulse pounding in her ears. I think you treated me 8 years ago. Dr. Harvey's forehead creased slightly as he folded his hands on the desk. You think? She inhaled sharply, gripping the armrests of the chair. I found a hospital record. It says I was admitted, but there's no information about why. You signed it. Dr. Harvey didn't react right away. Instead, he sat very still, his fingers tapping lightly against his desk. Jillian leaned forward, her voice tight. Can you tell me what happened to me? He exhaled through his nose, like he was weighing something. Then, finally, he spoke. You were found wandering the streets late at night, he said, his voice measured. You were barefoot, wearing a thin dress in the middle of winter. A couple saw you standing on a corner, shivering, and called for help. By the time you arrived at the hospital, you were disoriented, severely dehydrated, and had no memory of how you got there. Jillian's stomach twisted. What? Dr. Harvey continued, his tone gentle but firm. You didn't know your name. You didn't know where you lived. You couldn't recall anything about your life. We ran tests, neurological exams, blood work, everything came back normal. No head trauma, no drugs or alcohol in your system. Jillian gripped the edge of her seat, her vision tunneling slightly. Then what was wrong with me? Dr. Harvey hesitated again, but this time, he met her eyes directly. Stress-induced amnesia, he said quietly. Your brain shut down your memories as a response to extreme trauma. You were in a fugue state. The words landed with a strange, hollow weight. Jillian shook her head. That doesn't make sense. I remember my life. I remember Caleb. I remember. Her voice broke. Dr. Harvey watched her carefully. What do you remember before Caleb? Jillian opened her mouth. Nothing came out. The room suddenly felt too warm, the air too thick. She could picture Caleb perfectly, his smile, his voice, the way he held Theo as a baby, but before him, before their life together? It was all static. Her chest tightened. Are you saying I made him up? Dr. Harvey sighed. Not intentionally. When someone experiences memory loss due to trauma, the brain sometimes fills in the gaps. It creates something that feels real. A life, a person, a relationship. It gives you something solid to hold on to. Jillian felt like she might be sick. But why? She whispered. Dr. Harvey leaned forward slightly, his expression unreadable. That's the real question, isn't it? Jillian had always hated the idea of hypnosis. It reminded her of cheap magic tricks, of men in tuxedos waving pocket watches, of volunteers clucking like chickens for an audience's amusement. It seemed ridiculous, unscientific, and, most of all, dangerous. The idea of someone reaching into her mind, pulling memories loose like old stitches, made her stomach turn. Dr. Harvey, however, didn't look like a man who believed in parlor tricks. He sat across from her, calm and composed, his hands folded neatly in his lap. It's not about control, he said, his voice even. It's about accessing what's already there. Jillian shook her head. What if I don't want to know? Dr. Harvey didn't react, just watched her carefully. Then why did you come here? That was the problem, wasn't it? She had spent weeks clawing at this mystery, digging through every corner of her life, desperate for an answer. But now that the answer was close, she felt like she was standing on the edge of something steep and irreversible. She exhaled sharply. Fine. Let's do it. Dr. Harvey nodded and gestured toward a reclining chair. She hesitated before settling in, her hands gripping the armrests like she was bracing for impact. Close your eyes, he instructed. Just listen to my voice. She obeyed, focusing on the slow cadence of his words, the steady rhythm of her own breath. He spoke in a calm, measured tone, guiding her deeper into relaxation, deeper into the spaces of her mind she had spent years unknowingly locking away. And then, slowly, something shifted. The air in the room felt heavier. Her thoughts became looser, less guarded. Images flickered behind her closed eyelids, hazy at first, then sharper. A street lamp casting a pale glow. The crunch of gravel beneath her shoes. A man's voice, low, familiar. She strained toward it, her heart hammering. A face emerged from the fog of her memory, solidifying with alarming clarity. A strong jawline. Deep-set eyes. But it wasn't Caleb. Her breath hitched. She knew this man. He was important. He was. Her body jerked violently. Her eyes snapped open. She was gasping, heart racing, fingers digging into the chair's fabric. Dr. Harvey was watching her carefully, concern etched into his face. What did you see? He asked gently. Jillian pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady her breathing. I saw him, she whispered. But it wasn't Caleb. The room spun. Caleb wasn't real. He had never been real. Her mind had made him up, had needed him. Because the man in her memory, the one her brain had worked so hard to erase, was someone else entirely. Jillian gripped the edges of Declan's desk like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Her pulse roared in her ears, her breath shallow and uneven. I need you to find out what happened to me, she said, voice tight, controlled. Declan, who had clearly been expecting this conversation since she walked in, leaned back in his chair and studied her. His office was dimly lit, the glow of his computer screen casting sharp shadows over his face. "I already started looking," he admitted. "After you told me about the hypnosis." Jillian's nails dug into the desk. "And?" Declan exhaled, then turned his screen toward her. "You were in a car accident 8 years ago. Late at night, middle of nowhere. The car hit a guardrail and flipped." A cold, slow chill crept down Jillian's spine. She forced herself to speak. "And?" Declan clicked the mouse, pulling up another document. "You were found unconscious at the scene. The paramedics thought you wouldn't make it." "But," he hesitated. "You weren't alone." The words made her stomach turn. "There was a man in the car with you," Declan continued, his voice quieter now. "He died on impact." Jillian's hands clenched into fists. "Who was he?" Declan hesitated again, jaw tightening. "That's the thing," he said. "The police report never identified him." Jillian stared at the screen, the words blurring together. "A man. In the car with her. 8 years ago. A man with no name." Her body felt like it had been disconnected from her brain, like she was floating somewhere outside herself, watching this unfold from a distance. Caleb had never existed. But someone had. And whoever he was, he had died that night. With her. The police station smelled like stale coffee and old paper, the kind of place where time moved slower, dragged down by bureaucracy and bad fluorescent lighting. Jillian sat across from Officer Merrick, a man who looked like he had been dealing with paperwork longer than she had been alive. He had the tired expression of someone who had seen everything and cared about almost none of it. "You're telling me you don't remember the accident?" he asked, flipping through a thin, yellowed file. Jillian swallowed hard. "I don't remember anything from that night." Merrick let out a slow breath, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "You were lucky. The paramedics didn't think you'd pull through." He glanced at the file again before closing it with a quiet thump. "Why are you looking into this now?" Jillian's hands clenched into fists beneath the table. "Because there was someone else in the car with me." Merrick's expression didn't change. He just sighed like he had already known this was where the conversation was going. "Yes." Jillian's pulse kicked up. "Who was he?" Merrick hesitated. Then he slid the file toward her. She hesitated before flipping it open, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear. Inside was a single page. Male. Approximate age, early 30s. No ID. No personal belongings. No fingerprints in any system. "Unidentified accident victim," she read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. Merrick nodded. "We ran his prints through every database. Nothing came up. No missing persons reports matched his description. We had nothing to go on." Jillian's throat tightened. "So they just closed the case?" There was no foul play. No evidence of anything suspicious. Merrick leaned forward slightly, his voice quieter now. "We assumed he was homeless. Or someone living off the grid. People fall through the cracks all the time." Jillian shook her head. "But he was in my car." Merrick exhaled through his nose. "And no one ever came looking for him." Her hands shook as she stared at the file. A man had died next to her. A man she had once known. And no one, not even the police, had any idea who he was. The house was too quiet. The kind of quiet that didn't feel peaceful, just hollow. Jillian sat at the kitchen table, an old shoebox in front of her, its edges frayed from years of being shoved into closets and drawers. She had gone through this box before, but never like this. Never with the kind of fear that settled deep in her bones. Her fingers trembled as she sifted through old paperwork, hospital bills, pediatrician forms, immunization records. And then, finally, she found it. Theo's birth certificate. She held her breath as she unfolded it, smoothing out the creases. Her eyes scanned the familiar words, moving past her own name, past the date, past the official seal. Then she saw it. Father's name, unknown. Her stomach twisted. This was a mistake. It had to be. She remembered Caleb being there. She remembered his hand in hers, his voice in her ear, whispering reassurances between contractions. She remembered the way he looked at Theo when he held him for the first time, the way he kissed her forehead, the way he... Her vision blurred. Had any of that happened? Her grip on the paper tightened as she forced herself to think, to separate memory from reality. She remembered Caleb, but she had also remembered a wedding that had never existed. A house bought with his name on it that had only ever been hers. A life built around someone who had never been real. What if this was the same? What if Caleb had never been there at all? Her breathing came faster, uneven, shallow. She thought of Theo, of his big brown eyes and the questions he had started asking, the ones she had brushed off with promises she could no longer keep. He deserved the truth. And so did she. Dr. Harvey's office was colder this time. Or maybe Jillian just felt colder. Her sweater wasn't enough, but she didn't ask for a blanket. She was afraid if she let herself get too comfortable, she wouldn't go through with it. Dr. Harvey sat across from her, the same calm, patient expression on his face. She wondered if anything ever surprised him. "Are you sure?" he asked, though they both knew the answer. Jillian nodded, swallowing hard. "I need to know." Dr. Harvey didn't push. He simply gestured to the reclined chair, and Jillian lowered herself onto it, hands clenched at her sides. "Close your eyes," he said gently. She obeyed, focusing on his voice as he guided her down again, the way he had before. The hum of the ceiling vent, the faint ticking of a clock somewhere in the room, it all faded. And then the memory came. She was in a car. The night was dark, headlights illuminating the stretch of road ahead. There was music playing, something low and familiar. She turned her head. A man was in the driver's seat. Not Caleb. A different man. The realization settled deep in her chest, pressing against her ribs. She strained to see his face, to hear his voice, to remember. And then she did. His name surfaced, slipping past the barrier her mind had put up. He was real. He had been real. She saw the flash of his smile, the way his fingers drummed against the steering wheel. She heard him say her name. Then, impact. A jolt. A screech of metal. The memory shattered, the pieces sharp as glass. Jillian gasped, eyes snapping open, chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. Dr. Harvey was watching her carefully. "What did you see?" he asked. Jillian pressed a trembling hand to her forehead. "I saw him." She inhaled sharply. Caleb wasn't real. Her voice was barely above a whisper. But he was. The grocery store was too bright. Too loud. Jillian stood in the cereal aisle, staring at the endless rows of brightly colored boxes, completely incapable of making a decision. Theo loved the chocolate kind, but he also liked the one with the little marshmallows. Maybe she should just get both. Maybe she should get none. Maybe she should just go home and crawl under the covers and pretend none of this was happening. "Bree?" Justine's voice pulled her back. She turned to find her best friend studying her carefully, a basket hooked over one arm, a bag of frozen peas in the other. "You okay?" Jillian opened her mouth, then closed it. What was she supposed to say? "I just found out the father of my child never existed, and I have no idea how to explain that to him. She exhaled slowly, shaking her head. I don't know how to tell him. Justine set down her basket. Theo? Jillian nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. How do I tell my son that the father he's been asking about wasn't real? That I spent 8 years lying to him without even knowing it? Justine didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled a box of cereal from the shelf and tossed it into Jillian's cart. Theo's favorite. Then she placed a hand on Jillian's arm. Bree, you didn't lie to him. You believed it, too. Jillian's throat tightened. But what do I say? Justine squeezed gently. You tell him the truth. In a way he can understand. Jillian swallowed hard. And if he hates me for it? Justine's face softened. He won't. Jillian wanted to believe that. She wanted to believe that Theo wouldn't look at her like she was a stranger when she told him. Justine reached into Jillian's cart, grabbed a second box of Theo's favorite cereal, and tossed it in with the first. You're his mom, Bree. You always have been. The words settled deep in her chest, pressing against something raw and aching. Justine was right. She had always been Theo's parent. No matter what. The cemetery was quiet, except for the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. It wasn't the kind of place people visited often, no fresh flowers, no carefully tended headstones. Just rows of numbered markers, plain and impersonal, pressed into the dirt like an afterthought. Jillian tightened her coat around her, the chill settling deep in her bones. Declan stood beside her, hands in his pockets, scanning the lot like he had done this 1,000 times. Maybe he had. This is it, he said finally, nodding toward a small, flat marker near the edge of the lot. Jillian's breath caught as she stepped forward, her boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. The plaque was simple, just a number etched into the metal. No name. No date. No words to say who he was or that he had even mattered. A lump formed in her throat. She had spent weeks chasing answers, unraveling memories that had turned to smoke in her hands. And now, standing here, she realized she had been looking for something she couldn't find. There was no closure. No neat, satisfying ending. Just this. A grave with no name. She crouched down, pressing her palm against the cool metal. I'm sorry, she whispered. Theo stood a few feet away, his small hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket. He had been quiet the entire drive, watching her with the kind of careful attention only children seem to possess. Now, he stepped closer, his gaze flicking between her and the marker. His voice was small when he spoke. Is this Daddy? Jillian's throat tightened. She could feel Declan watching her, waiting, but she didn't look up. She could have lied. She could have said yes. Instead, she swallowed the knot in her throat and whispered, It's someone I loved very much. Theo considered this, then nodded like it made sense. After a moment, he reached for her hand. She squeezed it tightly, holding on like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Maybe it was. The mornings felt different now. Lighter, somehow. Jillian still woke up early, still packed Theo's lunch, still reminded him, twice, to wear socks that actually matched. But there was something new in the way she moved through the day, something quieter, steadier. She wasn't searching anymore. She hadn't realized how much of her life had been spent chasing ghosts, how much space she had given to someone who had never really been there. Caleb had been a name, a feeling, a story she had clung to when the truth had been too much to hold. But now, she had something real. Theo, sitting at the kitchen table, frowning at a math worksheet. Justine, texting her every morning with some absurd meme to make sure she was still laughing. The way the air smelled crisp with the first signs of fall, the way the sunlight spilled onto the floor just right in the afternoons. Real things. She rinsed out Theo's cereal bowl and glanced at the clock. She had exactly 20 minutes before she had to drop him off at school and head to her new volunteer shift. The trauma recovery center wasn't much to look at, an old brick building with mismatched furniture and a coffee maker that sputtered like it might die at any moment. But people came. People who had lost pieces of themselves, who were searching for something they couldn't name. Jillian didn't have all the answers, but she knew what it felt like to be untethered, to wake up one day and realize the story you'd built your life around wasn't real. She could listen. She could sit in the quiet with people who needed to be reminded that they weren't alone. "Mom?" Theo's voice pulled her back. He was standing by the door, backpack slung over one shoulder, looking at her like he knew she had drifted somewhere far away for a second. "You okay?" Jillian smiled, ruffling his hair. "Yeah, kid. I really am." And for the first time in a long time, it was true. The house was quiet, the kind of stillness that only came late at night when even the hum of the refrigerator seemed softer. Jillian sat on the couch, an old shirt draped across her lap. The fabric was worn, faded in places, but it still held a weight she couldn't explain. Theo shuffled into the living room, rubbing his eyes. His hair was a mess of curls sticking up in different directions, his pajamas slightly too big on him. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, smoothing a hand over the fabric. Theo yawned and plopped down next to her. "Not really." His gaze landed on the shirt, and he tilted his head. "Is that the one you found?" Jillian nodded. Theo hesitated. "Can I have it?" Her breath caught in her throat. She glanced down at the fabric in her hands, at the memories she had attached to it, at the story she had unknowingly written over something that had belonged to someone else. She had spent so much time trying to make sense of the past, trying to find something solid to hold on to. But Theo was here. He was real. He wasn't a question mark in an old file or a missing person lost to time. He was her son, and he was looking at her now, waiting. She smiled, blinking back tears. "Yeah, kid. You can have it." Theo grinned and took the shirt from her, running his fingers over the fabric. As he did, something caught her eye. A tiny bit of stitching inside the sleeve, nearly invisible against the seam. She leaned in, gently pulling at the fabric. 2 letters. JL. Her fingers hovered over the initials, her heart pounding. The real name of the man she had lost? A clue to a life she had buried without even knowing it? She may never know. But as Theo hugged the shirt to his chest and rested his head against her shoulder, she realized something. Maybe she didn't need to. The room was dim, the only light coming from the small nightlight plugged into the wall, casting soft shadows across the ceiling. Theo was curled up under his blankets, his breathing slow and even, one arm wrapped around the old shirt she had given him. The fabric was bunched up under his chin, his fingers clutching it the way he used to hold his stuffed rabbit when he was little. Jillian sat on the edge of the bed, watching him sleep. There was something about the quiet moments like this, the ones where nothing was happening, but everything felt full. The kind of moment that made her realize just how much she had spent chasing something that didn't matter nearly as much as what was right in front of her. She had spent weeks unraveling a mystery, searching for a truth she thought she needed to survive. But the truth wasn't Caleb. It wasn't in the missing records or the forgotten accident. It wasn't in a hospital file or a lost memory. The truth was here. In Theo's slow, steady breaths. In the way his curls stuck to his forehead when he was too warm. In the way he had taken the news, the complicated, impossible, heartbreaking news, and simply asked if he could still be hers. She no longer needed to prove Caleb was real. Because what mattered was what she had built. A life with her son. A life she had fought for, even when she hadn't understood what she was fighting against. A life filled with love, resilience, and the ability to keep moving forward, even when the past refused to give her all the answers. Jillian reached down, smoothing a stray curl from Theo's forehead, pressing the softest kiss against his temple. Then she stood, turned off the light, and walked into tomorrow.